I want you to think about the last time you held onto a losing trade, far longer than you should have. Not because you had a plan, not because your analysis told you to wait, but because some quiet voice inside you kept whispering, just give it a little more room, it will come back. And you listened to that voice, even though every rational part of your brain was screaming at you to cut it loose. I have sat in that exact seat more times than I care to admit, and I built and lost fortunes learning what that voice actually is. It is not weakness, it is not a lack of willpower, and it is most certainly not a discipline problem, no matter what every trading book on the shelf tries to tell you. Here is the truth nobody wants to say out loud. You are not afraid of losing money. You are afraid of what losing that trade says about you. Somewhere along the way, without you even noticing it happen, your identity got fused to your positions. Being right on a trade started to feel like being a good trader, a smart trader, a trader who has finally figured this game out. And being wrong on a trade started to feel like proof that you are a fraud, that you do not belong in these markets, that maybe you never will. That is not a money problem. That is an ego problem wearing a trader's clothes. I remember a stretch in my career where I was convinced I had finally cracked the code of the tape. I had strung together a run of winners, and I started to believe my own legend. Then I took a position in a stock I was certain was going to run, and it turned against me almost immediately. Any sensible man would have cut it in the first hour. I did not. I held it for 3 days, watching it bleed, telling myself the market was wrong, not me. By the time I finally sold, I had given back 2 weeks of gains in a single trade, and when I sat alone that night and asked myself honestly why I held on so long, the answer had nothing to do with my chart reading. It had everything to do with the fact that I could not stand the idea of admitting, even to myself, that I had been wrong. Let me take you further back, to when I was still a young man, making my first real money on the tape. In those early days, I did not even have the vocabulary for what was happening inside me. I only knew that when a trade went against me, my stomach would tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the size of the loss. A small loss could feel like a wound, while a large gain from the trade before could feel hollow within a day. I did not understand then that money was never really the variable driving my emotions. It was always my sense of self, rising and falling with every tick of the tape, as if the market itself were a judge handing down a verdict on my worth as a man. Other traders around me at the time seemed to move through losses with an ease I could not understand. I used to think they simply had thicker skin, that they were built differently, immune somehow to the sting that I felt so sharply. It took me years to realize that was not the case at all. They felt the sting too. Every trader does, no matter how experienced. The difference was that they had learned, through hard experience of their own, not to let that sting dictate their next decision. They had built a wall, not between themselves and the emotion, but between the emotion and the action that followed it. Feeling fear was allowed. Letting fear choose the trade was not. This is the part most traders never confront. You can read every book on risk management. You can memorize every rule about position sizing and stop losses. You can recite discipline like a mantra every single morning before the bell rings. And you will still freeze up when a trade turns against you. Because the fear was never about the mechanics of trading in the first place. The fear lives somewhere deeper. It lives in the story you have built about who you are, and what it means about you, if the market proves that story wrong. Think about it honestly for a moment. When you cut a loss quickly and cleanly, how does it feel? For most traders, it does not feel like relief. It feels like defeat. It feels like a public confession that you misjudged something, that you were not smart enough to see what was coming, that the market outsmarted you. And so instead of taking that small, cheap loss, you hold on, you hope. You add to the position to lower your average. You do anything except admit the truth. You are not managing risk in that moment. You are managing your self-image. And self-image is a far more powerful force in the human mind than any rule you have ever written down in a trading journal. I learned this the hard way, more than once. There was a time I convinced myself that averaging down was a sound strategy, when in truth, it was nothing more than my pride refusing to accept that I had been wrong. Every dollar I added to that losing position was not capital. It was an excuse. It was me buying more time before I had to face the truth. And the market, which does not care one bit about your pride, eventually forced the truth on me anyway, just at a far higher price than it needed to cost. There was another time, years later, when I had already rebuilt my reputation once, and swore I would never repeat the same mistake. Yet there I was again, holding a position that every signal told me to abandon, simply because closing it meant admitting that my read on the situation had been flawed. I remember staring at the ticker, watching the losses grow, and feeling a strange paralysis take hold of my hands. It was not that I lacked the knowledge to act. I had the knowledge in abundance. What I lacked was the willingness to let go of the story I had told myself about being the man who saw this trade coming. Letting the trade go meant letting that story go too, and some part of me would rather lose money than lose that story. So if fear of losing trades is not a discipline problem, what is it actually? It is an identity problem. It is the direct result of tying your sense of self-worth to the outcome of any single trade. And once you see it this way, you start to understand why willpower alone can never fix it. You cannot discipline your way out of an identity crisis. You have to dismantle the identity crisis itself. The first step is understanding something that took me years and a great deal of lost capital to fully accept. Being wrong on a trade is not a reflection of your intelligence, your worth, or your ability as a trader. It is simply the cost of doing business in an environment of uncertainty. Every great trader who ever lived has been wrong, repeatedly, consistently, for their entire careers. The difference between the ones who survive and the ones who blow up is not that the great ones are wrong less often. It is that the great ones have separated the outcome of a trade from their sense of who they are. When a trade fails, they see it as information. When an amateur's trade fails, he sees it as an indictment. I want you to sit with that distinction for a moment, because it changes everything about how you approach risk. Once a loss is simply information, rather than a verdict on your character, cutting it becomes easy. There is no ego to protect. There is no story to defend. You see the trade is not working, you accept the small cost, and you move on to the next opportunity with a clear head. But as long as your identity is wrapped up in being right, every loss becomes a threat to your very sense of self, and you will fight against that threat with every ounce of irrational energy you have. That is why you hold too long. That is why you add to losers. That is why you freeze at the exact moment you need to act. Consider for a moment what fear actually does to the body and the mind when a trade turns against you. Your heart rate climbs. Your thoughts narrow. You stop thinking in probabilities and start thinking in absolutes. This has to come back. I cannot be wrong here. It will turn around if I just wait one more hour. That narrowing is not a discipline failure. It is a survival mechanism, firing in completely the wrong context. Your mind was built to protect you from lions on an open plain, not from a red number on a screen. But because the emotional circuitry does not know the difference between physical danger and financial danger to your identity, it reacts with the same intensity either way. Understanding this does not make the fear disappear, but it does make it far less mysterious. And things that are less mysterious are far easier to manage. The second thing I had to learn was to stop treating my trading account as a scoreboard for my personal worth. This sounds simple, but very few traders actually practice it. Your account balance is a reflection of your process, executed over time, not a real-time referendum on your intelligence. A single trade tells you almost nothing about your skill as a trader. 100 trades, managed with consistent risk and a clear process, tells you everything. When you shift your focus from the outcome of this one trade to the integrity of your process, across many trades, the emotional weight of any single loss shrinks dramatically. It stops being a crisis and starts being a data point. There is a hard exercise I used to force myself through, and I still recommend it to anyone serious about fixing this. After you take a loss, before you do anything else, write down the exact reason you entered the trade and the exact reason it failed. Do not write down excuses about the market being manipulated or unfair. Write down the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. This forces you to separate your analysis from your identity. It becomes a study of the trade, not a trial of your character. Over time, this simple habit rewires the way your mind relates to losing. The loss becomes something you examine with curiosity, not something you flee from in shame. I also had to build a rule that protected me from myself on my worst days, the days when the fear was loudest. I decided in advance, while calm and clear-headed, exactly how much I was willing to lose on any single idea before I ever entered it. That decision, made in a moment of composure, became a kind of contract I made with my future self, the self who would be gripped by fear and looking for any excuse to break the rule. The point of writing the rule down beforehand is precisely that you cannot trust yourself to make a good decision in the heat of the moment. Nobody can. The market has broken far greater men than you or me at the exact instant they trusted their emotions over their plan. I want to be honest with you about something else, because I think too many traders are told a version of this lesson that is dishonest in its simplicity. They are told, simply cut your losses and everything will be fine. But knowing that you should cut a loss and actually being able to do it in the moment are two entirely different skills, separated by a wide and often painful gap. The knowing lives in your mind. The doing lives somewhere in your nervous system, in patterns built over years of association between loss and shame. You cannot close that gap by reading one more book or hearing one more lecture. You close it only through repetition, through taking the small loss again and again, until your nervous system finally learns, through direct experience, that a small loss is survivable, that it does not end you, that the sun still rises the next morning, and the account still has capital in it, ready to be deployed on the next idea. This is why traders who intellectually understand risk management for years still struggle to execute it. The lesson has to move from the head into the hands, and that only happens through practice, not through understanding alone. I also think it is worth naming the specific moment where most traders lose this battle, because if you can recognize the moment as it is happening, you have already won half the fight. The moment is not when you enter the trade. It is not even when the trade first turns against you. The moment is a few minutes or a few hours later, when the position has moved just far enough against you that closing it now would mean locking in a loss larger than you are comfortable admitting to, but not so far that hope has completely died. This is the danger zone, the place where the mind bargains hardest, where every excuse sounds reasonable, where you convince yourself that just a little more patience is all that is needed. Learn to recognize that specific feeling, that particular flavor of bargaining, because once you can name it in real time, you can choose to act against it instead of being swept along by it. There is one more layer to this that took me the longest to accept, and it may be the most important of all. You must learn to separate the trade from the trader. The trade is a hypothesis about what the market will do next, built on the information available to you at the time. It is not a statement about your character, your intelligence, or your future. When you make this separation real in your mind, not just as an idea you nod along to, but as a felt truth, something shifts. You start to see losses the way a scientist sees a failed experiment, not as proof of personal failure, but as one more piece of evidence, refining your understanding of how the market behaves. Scientists do not quit their careers every time a hypothesis fails. They adjust and they continue. That is the posture you need toward your own losing trades. None of this happens overnight, and I will not pretend it does. The fear you feel when a trade turns against you is deeply wired, built from a lifetime of associating being wrong with being inadequate. But the market does not know your history, and does not care about your ego. It simply moves, indifferent to your feelings about it. Your job is not to eliminate fear entirely. Your job is to stop letting that fear masquerade as a discipline problem you keep trying to fix, with more rules, more willpower, more white-knuckled effort. The rules were never the issue. The story you tell yourself about what a loss means was always the real battlefield. Fix that story, and the discipline you have been chasing for years will finally start to show up on its own. Not because you forced it, but because there is nothing left inside you fighting against it. I have watched men with brilliant minds destroy themselves in these markets, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they could not let go of the need to be right. And I have watched ordinary men with modest talent build lasting fortunes, simply because they made peace with being wrong, often, cheaply, and without shame. The market rewards humility far more than it rewards brilliance. It punishes ego without mercy and without exception. Let me tell you what changed for me, practically, once I understood all of this. I stopped asking myself, when a trade went against me, whether I was willing to be wrong. That question always led me back into the trap. because some prideful part of me would always answer no, not this time, not on this one. Instead, I started asking a different question entirely. I asked myself, if I did not already own this position, would I buy it right now at this price, knowing everything I know at this moment? That single question strips away all the emotional attachment to how you got into the trade. It does not care about your original thesis, your pride, or how convinced you were 3 days ago. It only cares about the truth of the situation as it exists right now. And more often than not, the honest answer to that question was, no, I would not buy this now, which meant I had no business continuing to hold it. This reframing works because it separates the decision from the narrative. Most traders stay trapped in losing positions because leaving means confronting the narrative directly, admitting out loud, or even just to themselves, that the story they told was wrong. But asking whether you would enter fresh right now sidesteps that confrontation entirely. You are not admitting defeat. You are simply making the best decision available to you with the information you have today. That is not weakness. That is precisely what a professional does, every single day, without exception. I also want to address something that took me far too long to understand, which is the difference between fear that protects you and fear that destroys you. Not all fear is your enemy in this business. A trader with no fear at all is just as dangerous as a trader who is paralyzed by it. Fear, in its proper place, keeps you cautious with size, keeps you humble about your predictions, keeps you honest about what you do not know. The goal was never to eliminate fear from my trading entirely. The goal was to stop letting fear masquerade as certainty in either direction, whether that certainty said hold on because you cannot be wrong, or certainty said panic and sell everything because the world is ending. Both of those are fear wearing a disguise. Calm, clear-headed risk management is what remains once you strip the disguise away. There is a particular kind of trader I want to warn you about, because I was that trader once, and perhaps you recognize yourself in this too. This is the trader who has read every book, who can quote every rule about cutting losses short and letting winners run, who nods along with every piece of wisdom about discipline, and who still, when the moment actually arrives, freezes exactly the same way he did before he read any of it. If this describes you, understand that you have not failed to learn the rules. You have simply not yet done the deeper work of separating your identity from your positions. Knowledge without that internal work is like owning a map to a country you refuse to travel to. The map is accurate. It simply is not being used. Building this kind of internal discipline is slow, quiet work, and it rarely announces itself with dramatic breakthroughs. It shows up instead in small moments. A loss, taken a little faster than last month. A position sized a little more sensibly than the month before. A night's sleep that comes a little easier because you are no longer carrying the weight of a trade that should have been closed days ago. Those small moments compound over years into something that looks, from the outside, like natural talent. It is not talent. It is simply a trader who finally stopped fighting himself. If you take nothing else from what I have told you today, take this. Your worth was never sitting in that trade. It never will be. The moment you truly believe that, the fear that has been running your account for years will finally lose its grip on you, and what replaces it is something far more valuable than confidence. It is clarity, and clarity, more than any rule you will ever memorize, is what separates the trader who survives this business for decades from the one who is gone within a year. I did not learn any of this quickly, and I will not insult you by pretending there is a shortcut. I discovered that you have simply overlooked. There is no shortcut. There is only the slow, humbling process of losing money, sitting with the discomfort of why you lost it, and refusing to look away from the answer even when that answer implicates your own pride rather than the market's unfairness. Do that enough times, honestly enough times, and one day you will notice the fear is simply quieter than it used to be, not gone. Quieter, and quieter is enough to trade well.